Hi everyone, and welcome to the Burnt Brass Homestead channel. There was a lot of basil in the garden ready to be harvested. Some had even begun flowering. So in this video, I show you the process I follow to dehydrate them. After harvesting the basil, the first thing I do is fill the sink with water to allow the basil to soak, and at the same time allow bugs to float to the top and debris to sink to the bottom. I allow the basil to soak for about 30 minutes or more, and then I begin removing the leaves from the stem and placing them on a kitchen towel to dry. Now, typically you can just pull 2 or 3 fingers down the stem of the herb in the opposite direction in which the leaves are growing to pop the leaves off easily. In this case, the basil was wet, so that didn't quite work as well. So for the most part, I had to pick the leaves off. Now, with that said, I could have just left the basil on the stem, but cut into smaller pieces to place in the dehydrator. After the dehydration process was complete, I could have put the basil in the blender or food processor and pulsed until the basil resembled what you see when you purchase it from the store. But I didn't do that. But overall, this process only took about 30 minutes to complete, which is still much faster than running to the store to purchase basil. This is Nesco's Garden Master Dehydrator. I can tell you that the 2 dehydrators that get the most attention is this one, the Nesco brand, as well as the Excalibur. I do not own, nor have I ever used an Excalibur, but these 2 are the most talked about. I'm pretty sure there are other good ones out there, but I purchased my Nesco Garden Master on sale over 10 years ago. It came with 4 trays, but it could be stacked up to 20 trays. I ordered 6 additional trays, and now I have a total of 10. And I can tell you that I am satisfied with the way this product works. This dehydrator isn't really that loud, but I can hear it from the next room. The fan is mounted in the lid, and it forces heated air through those gaps near the perimeter of the tray, then horizontally across the trays, as well as through the center hole of the tray to distribute heated air evenly. So after placing the basil on a towel, a kitchen towel, and patting it dry gently and allowing the basil to air dry a little bit after that, then I started to place the leaves on the rack of the dehydrator. They were packed in tight but single layered, meaning not stacked on top of one another. This step was repeated until all the basil was used. Now, there are some people who do not like to dehydrate any of their herbs. Although I dehydrate them at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, it is still a little bit of heat being applied. Some people prefer to hang their herbs to let them air dry. However, I had a lot of basil that needed to dry and dry quickly. In addition to that, I had to follow up with drying sage. Not to mention, even McCormick, who touts being America's #1 herb and spice brand, they gently dry their herbs, and I'm assuming they mean using heat. Anyway, the dehydrated sage video will follow soon after this one. If you do not have a dehydrator, you can use your oven on the lowest setting to dehydrate your herbs or flowers or whatever you're trying to dehydrate. Just leave the door open slightly by maybe sticking a wooden spoon in there. And if your oven has a fan, turn that on as well to allow air to circulate. If you do not want to apply any heat to your herbs, by all means, air dry them. As a matter of fact, In addition to dehydrating most of the basil from the garden, I also air dried some of the basil, and both methods worked fine. But consider your environment if you do decide to air dry your basil. If you live in a very high humid area, you may not get great results from air drying herbs. However, what you can do is try drying some of your herbs by hanging them by the stem on a string, but then also placing some in a paper bag and poking little holes in them to allow the basil to breathe, and see which method works for you. Here I set the temperature to 95 degrees, although in the past I have set it to 90, which took a little longer, but it was less heat. And I started the timer off at 3.5 hours, but I added more time as was needed. That is how the Nesco Garden Master Dehydrator sound up close. Keep in mind the mic from the phone is less than 2 feet away. I think it took about 4 or 5 hours for the basil leaves to completely dry. And you can hear as I'm putting them in a jar that they're really crunchy sounding. From here, you can either store them whole or place them in a food processor or coffee grinder to further process these into crushed basil leaves. Now, I personally do not mind dehydrating my herbs, especially when I have a lot to store. And my goal is to grow as much herbs as possible and preserve them until the next spring-summer growing season. As I mentioned previously, I did air dry some of the basil. I did so by hanging some by a string and placing it on a hook in the kitchen. I also put some in a paper bag to simulate if I were in a high humid area. The air drying method took several days to dry. Your results may differ depending on your climate. Although air drying took longer, there was no equipment required to complete the process. In case you are wondering, the water that the basil was soaking in was used to water the plants, and the stems were composted.